Hello, friends. This camera. It's always this camera on Tuesdays. Hello, friends. Welcome back to a 1D10T Does Stuff. I'm the 1D10T in charge, Trevor Stewart, 1308. And we will be reading from Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings today. And discussing it. So, content warning for a whole bunch of not fun stuff. Before we get into that, today's pre-rolls brought to you by The Hidden Leaf, downtown Charlottesville, 105 West Main Street. On the downtown mall, above the brick, Suite 200. A great place to go with some great buds to get some great buds. A bud, and the only thing better than their bud is their customer service. Also, they have the lowest prices in town, according to my own personally highly biased research, by which I mean I was incredibly high when I did my personal biased research. You can find them on Instagram at The Hidden Leaf, where you can also find our other sponsors, Kush Gang Snacks, purveyors of fine edibles and drinkables at KG Snacks 434 on Instagram, and Firehouse, that's Firehouse spelled with a Z, not to be confused with Firehouse, at Firehouse on Instagram. Again, spelled with a Z. Where there's smoke, there's Firehouse. A note of disclaimer. I will be expressing opinions throughout this show, as others may as well. Those opinions belong to the expresser of the opinion. Possibly the channel, possibly the parent company, but not any of our advertisers. Oh, hey, Just Me Crystal. Much love, including The Hidden Leaf, Firehouse, spelled with a Z, Chris in the 386, and, Kush Gang Snacks. Cheese and crackers. How are you today, Just Me Crystal? Good to see you here. So, yeah, that would be the ad read. Let's see if I can turn the music down a little without turning it off. Oh, I'm sorry. You had a rough night. I'm sorry, love. I'm glad you're doing better today. I am doing well. I woke up this morning with what I would call an unreasonable sense of hopefulness, in that I had no good reason to feel hopeful. But I woke up in a hopeful mood anyway. So, hey, there's that. So, yeah, I guess let's dive into the book. It is, some of it's very dry reading. Knowing what it means is a little it just Yeah. I do want to say, at this point, I do want to point out that, we're going to be covering some difficult topics. Uh, Racism, fat phobia, sexism, and, if you don't, if that's not what you feel like you can handle, you know, please take care of yourself. That is, unless you are a cishet white man, in which case you need to not look away. If you look like me, you should probably be paying attention. So, yeah. Content warning out of the way, ad read out of the way. I think we're ready to get into the book. So, find yourself something nice and comfy to drink, something uplifting to smoke, and a nice warm chair. And let's buckle in. A quick note about production values. I am hoping that having the music on covers the sound of the fan from the laptop just a little bit. I've noticed that the fan from the laptop is working really hard, I think, running Streamlabs. And that's why the fan kicks on. So, just a production notes moment there. So let's take a look at what we're looking at here, where we are. Yeah, poor computer. It's not built for this specifically, this much work specifically, I don't think. It's built to do one of the things that it's doing. So. I always have a hard time figuring out where to put the highlighters. Okay, that'll do. Alright. You guys can sort of see to read along. We are in we're in the chapter called The Rise of the Big Black Woman. We are talking about Beignet and what time period are we talking about? Around Louis the 14th? I'm having a hard time finding exactly what time period, or exactly what date, but I have a feeling we'll come up on that shortly. We're gonna back up a paragraph or two paragraphs to get a running start to give us a. All right, just me, Crystal. Enjoy your shower. Enjoy your lurk. Much love. And we'll be backing up 2 paragraphs to get a running start here. The long-term impact of Benier's theories has been debated, but as progenitor of racial theories, Benier was often cited by subsequent race theorists. Later race theorists would routinely use race as justification for the colonial condition, as a way to determine the attractiveness of women around the world. In the mid-18th and early 19th centuries, I guess we're in the mid-18th to early 19th centuries, in the context of the Enlightenment and the peak of the slave trade, the science of race-making took flight. Then, as at its inception, philosophers underscored the purported racial distinction in facial features, body type, and attractiveness between black women and white women. Benier's notion of race had touched a nerve. His letter to Madame de la Sablière was eventually published in the esteemed Journal d'Escavance for the broader scientific community to mull over. Still, the evidence of its impact was not to be witnessed for another 60 years. As it turned out, many French scientists and philosophers at the time of his writings were preoccupied with either towing the intellectual line or fleeing the country in the face of renewed religious persecution. A variety of freedoms were restricted by Louis XIV in the 1680s. The king had long been begrudging at best when it came to the rights of Protestants. But in the watershed year of 1685, alongside the Code Noir, the king also issued the Edict of Fontainebleau. This order unraveled the Edict of Nantes, which had offered Protestant Huguenots a modicum of freedom in a Catholic nation, thereby effectively outlawing Protestantism in the territory. At the outset, rather than fight another bloody religious war, many Protestants chose to flee, repairing to various parts of England, the Dutch Republic, and Prussia. But by the turn of the 18th century, many of the remaining Protestants, calling themselves Commissars, took up arms in a new year. The reinvigorating religious battle competed with the War of Spanish Succession for the king's attention and the crown's resources until Louis XIV's death in 1715. The king's death had a ripple effect, triggering several important developments that would allow the national intelligentsia to return to honing their ideas of race. think we're gonna. I think we're gonna do this for context. For one, Louis XIV's policies had prevented widespread slavery in the French territories. Okay, that is a biggie. His passing gave functionaries an opportunity to push for new legislation enabling slave owners to safely travel to their homeland with their human assets in tow without fear of their assets being liberated on arrival. The Edict of October, issued 1716, intended to quell these fears by introducing new regulations that would allow slaveholders to keep their slaves as long as their slaves were registered at the courthouse. Unregistered slaves could be set free. Louis XIV himself issued the next key piece of legislation, the Declaration of 1738, stipulating that unregistered slaves, rather than being freed, would be seized and sent back to the colonies where they would presumably find themselves slaves. Oh, that's Louis the Fourth, not Louis the 14th. Louis the Fourth. Louis the Fifth. Eh. Correction issued to YouTube. I meant Louis the Fourth this whole time, not 14th. No, that is Louis the 14th. That's Louis the 15th. I did mean 14th and 15th because XIV is 10 plus 5 minus 1. That is 14th. XV is 10 plus 5. That's 15th. Okay, the Edict of October, issued 1716, intended to quell these fears by introducing new regulations that would allow slaveholders to keep their slaves as long as slaves were registered at the courthouse. Unregistered slaves would be set free. Louis XV himself issued the next key piece of legislation, the Declaration of 1738, stipulating that unregistered slaves, rather than being freed, would be seized and sent back to the colonies where they would presumably find themselves slaves to a new master. Importantly, these codes were to be specifically applied to that word. That's too close. Or African slaves. This meant that persons coming before the court demanding their freedom could be set free if they could successfully prove they were not African. Such proof was generally found in their physical traits, those having been elaborated by Beignet and a host of non-French European authors since the 15th century. Beginning in the 1740s, the intensely controversial nature of these laws and their requisite practice prompted a variety of intellectuals to revisit the question of potential fundamental differences within the humankind. That, I feel, it this is basically racism trying to dress itself up in a lab coat. And this is when racism as we know it is still pretty new. Still figuring itself out, still trying to figure out the way of justifying itself. And it is it's interesting to look at, I guess, from a psychological point of view, but it's also awful. And that I think, again, what I'm trying to do and what I think what I remember this book doing is drawing a line directly from this, how the beauty standards before this turned into this, where people are trying to, dress up these ideas as science so that it can support their burgeoning institution of dehumanization. And burgeoning, there's still unstable practice of institutionalizing dehumanization. I think that the true institutions of dehumanization found their footing as these ideas really took root in the New World, in the Americas. Vespucci land. I'm not a historian, I'm just an idiot, so, But I feel like slavery dissolved in Europe and England. Now the racism didn't. And England's colonialism sure did hinge on this, on some of these pseudoscientific ideas about eugenic ideas. This is proto-eugenics right here. This is as eugenics is finding its footing. And most certainly, the idea of racism and eugenics found footing in parts of Europe, namely Germany. And we can see that it's still at play in the United States when we look at Sydney Sweeney's commercial. It is so full of eugenics dog whistles that it's, I mean, should be obvious, right? And it is. But they hide behind the cry of, it's not that deep. It's always that deep. It's always that deep. And it's probably even deeper than that. So, I'm just saying, that's why we're... there's a direct line from this to where we're at now. And I feel like this book has done a good job of drawing the line from, you know, I won't say from its beginning, but from an earlier point to here. From its classical and neoclassical roots. In addition, the late king's death created the space for intellectual liberty that would allow the Enlightenment to flourish in France. The Enlightenment was a European intellectual movement that had actually begun in the mid-17th century, kindled by Descartes' 1637 Discourse on Method and its infamous postulate, I think, therefore I am. Descartes walked into a bar. The bartender said, "Hey, Rene, would you like a beer?" Descartes said, "I think not." Poof! For Rene Descartes, 'twas a drunken fart. I drink, therefore I am. A whole new era of inquiry developed in which reason was regarded as the primary source and arbiter of knowledge. I mean, yeah. These new adventures in what was called rationalism had been taking place largely outside the French Commonwealth, in England, Scotland, and the Dutch Republic, since in Descartes' home country his idea had been deemed heretical by the monarchy. The death of Louis XIV loosened the monarchy's stranglehold on the dissemination of non-traditional ideas. Officially launching the French Age of Reason. And you'd think that'd be a good thing, right? And some really great ideas came out of that age of reason, I suppose. But also, and there's always room for two things to be true at the same time. Well, not always. It was within this cultural and political environment that many of the most renowned thinkers of French Enlightenment felt compelled to return their attention to the judiciously applied fundamental different. It was within this cultural and political environment that many of the most renowned thinkers of the French Enlightenment felt compelled to return their attention to the judiciously applied fundamental differences that exist within humanity. And quite promptly, Enlightenment luminaries like Georges Louis Leclerc picked up where Beignet left off. It is I, Leclerc. Georges Louis Leclerc was a prodigal son. His father was Lord of the Buffon, a small township in eastern France. Born into a family of landed wealth, the teenage Georges Louis bounced around colleges at his leisure before arriving at Angers in 1728. Shortly thereafter, his middling academic achievements were brought to an abrupt halt when, having been challenged to and subsequent losing a duel, was forced to flee the city. Leclerc landed first in Nantes. From there, he set off for Italy and England with his comrade, a comparably well-off young English duke. 3 years later, when Leclerc's mother died, he returned to take control of the family estate in Buffon, claiming his title, Comte de Buffon. I really feel like it feels like I'm making fun of it, but I am not. If I were making fun of it, I would say Comte de Buffoon. But I'm not. Back in his home country, he finally settled into a habit of serious intellectual inquiry. Within a few years, he had translated several key scientific works, including one by Sir Isaac Newton. In 1739, he was offered the privilege of serving as the keeper of the Jardin des Rois, or Royal Botanical Garden, in Paris, where he was assigned the task of cataloging the royal holdings in natural history. This activity culminating in the royal holding. This activity culminated in Buffon's most significant work, Histoire naturelle générale et particulière. Natural History, General and Particular, published in 1749. It sounds a lot better in French. Histoire naturelle générale et particulière. Buffon devoted a seminal chapter of the book titled "Of the Varieties in the Human Species." To the inquiries of the presumed natural difference between the diverse peoples populating the earth. A staunch believer in the theory that all races descended from a common source, Buffon nevertheless believed in racial differences. He declared that individuals within a species who were capable of procreating and whose offspring shared a set of traits that mirrored those of their progenitors constituted members of a race. That leaves me with, hold on, that. I think that's the important part of that sentence. Let's revisit this sentence. He declared that individuals within a species who were capable of procreating and whose offspring shared a set of traits that mirrored those of their progenitors constituted members of a race. And I think the part of that where he gets caught up is whose offspring shared a set of traits that mirrored those of their progenitors constituted members of a race. Because the true. I don't think race is really truly a part of taxonomy. I think taxonomy ends at, you know, species or something. I mean, there are like, yeah, or not species, but how I don't know. And taxonomy is such an imperfect science, such an imperfect thing, concept. I mean, it breaks down because either fish don't exist or we're all fish. So, like, this is. We've got to recognize that none of this is science. It is all social construct. Echoing Beignet, Buffon allowed that the critical traits making a race were physical, repeating the late doctor's point that the first most remarkable difference is the color. After skin color, according to Buffon, the size and shape of the body were next most important markers of physical distinction between races. He had been aware of the stereotype of Africans being black, meager, and very small, which he attributed to the English seafarer Sir Francis Drake. This stereotype he claimed was inaccurate. He countered by noting that there was considerable diversity among the peoples of Africa, and not all of them were diminutive in size. Buffon's assessment, some Africans were meager and small, but they were not black Africans. More, as he claimed, were short, meager, of a disagreeable aspect, but ingenious and subtle. Like Beignet, he claimed that they belonged to the race of whites, black Africans, or the Negroes. Not saying it. By contrast, were tall, plump, but simple and stupid. I do feel like I feel like body size is more of a novelty of like body shape and size is more of a novelty of geography or, well, yeah, I'll go with geography than anything else. It's not really I think maybe some of it holds to long-term coupling habits of a group. But again, I don't think it's a I really don't think it's I think it has to do very much it's very much to do with environment, genetics, and individuality. Like it is an absolute, range. There's no yeah. I mean, yes, like one side of my family is generally just built bigger. The other side is generally built shorter. But there's also an epigenetic aspect to it. You know, I don't have the direct research to draw on, but there are epigenetic changes that happen that will affect a future generation. It just I just want to reiterate that this set of classifications, the ideas behind this set of classifications, is at best stupid, but really odious. This distinction between Moors and blacks in size and stature, with blacks being labeled plump, represented an important innovation in the elaboration of racial differences, of what Barbara and Karen Fields called racecraft. This differentiation had been largely absent in England and Holland during the previous century, as evidenced in Buffon's criticism of Francis Drake's accounts of Africans. In this way, Buffon was able to speak authoritatively without having to wholly abandon the stereotype of Africans as short and slight, a stereotype already lodged in the European imagination. Rather, Buffon articulated a new physical identity for black Africans who he claimed could be defined by both their skin and their enormity. According to Buffon, the plumpness of black Africans was evidence of their ease of circumstance and their idleness. The land inhabited by the Negroes, he claimed, was rich, abounding in pasturage and millet, and in trees always green. For this reason, black Africans were able to stay well nourished with little or no effort, which made them well fed, but also simple and stupid. Buffon's linking of corpulence to laziness and slow-wittedness was in harmony with the ideas of the thin, fine, serious intellectuals of England a century earlier. As well it should have been. Upon departing for England, Buffon found himself well received by the English intelligentsia. While there, he was elected a member of the Royal Society, one of Europe's first national scientific societies, whose founders included none other than muddy paw prints. None other than wayfish Cambridge Platonist Robert Boyle. Buffon never met Boyle, who died before he was born, but Buffon would have been privy to the writings of Boyle and the Royal Society's other founders, as well as those of subsequent members represented in the Society's official journal, Philosophical Transactions. Philosophical Transactions. It's not a different language, it's just italics. The journal was crammed with essays by scientists and physicians, several of whom shared Boyle's perspective that overindulgence and corpulence were signs of mental torpor. One entry written in 1733 by Dr. Alexander Stewart is typical. Stewart was responding to a question about cause of sleepiness after a meal. In his reply, Stewart conflated sleepiness with laziness and claimed that this predicament was caused by overeating and general lack of responsive self-management, since it was usual gross feeders, drunkards, corpulent, and short-necked by constitution. Short-necked by constitution. That just... Who felt sluggish after a meal. The lazy sleepiness, he argued, which routinely beset the robust and overindulgent, never attends those with force of mind to be temperate persons. Stewart further added that the problem of the post-meal lethargy was endemic to hot climates, which makes the inhabitants generally lazy and inactive. Clearly, ideas linking insipidness, greediness, and corpulence had long been in circulation in the Royal Society. Beginning in the 18th century, these traits were also being linked to hot climates. In this way, Buffon's theories connecting stupidity, plumpness, or bulk and blackness were by no means fringe. His natural history was intended to be the synthesis of decades' work of great tomes and minor works that were part of the royal collection in France, as he still had an appointment in the Jardin des Rois. His connection with the Royal Society meant his interpretation of the texts would be likely reflected in the Society's influence as well. Moreover, given the constant intellectual exchange between English and French during the Enlightenment, it is likely that many of the ideas, if not the critical texts themselves, would have been similar. Buffon never traveled to the more remote regions of Africa that he expounded upon. More of an armchair cartographer, he used his significant talents for classification to make claims about the nature of the races. And as with Beignet, within his treatment of race, he focused a great deal of his energy on the appearance of women. Buffon was the first celebrated scientist to assert that black Africans were plump, idle, and insipid. Yet, significantly, he did not find their figures unattractive. On the contrary, Buffon enthused about the tall, plump physique of the black African. Not saying that word. Describing it as well made. The term itself is gender neutral, but the topic turned to beauty, the language quickly became feminized. This is important to our greater general discussion around around the specific dangers of of these institutions to black women. Cheese and crackers, that was a gunshot. I don't know if y'all heard that. Yeah, it is, you know, this, we see this separation between black men and black women really beginning to form. I mean, as more than the separation between the sexes had formed before, I think. I think we are going to take a very brief break there. Because this next... We've got a few pages to go before we reach our next pausing point. And it looks like a lot of it is stuff we're going to want to talk about. So we're going to take a brief pause right here. And I will be back momentarily. Thank you everyone for being here. I appreciate you. Thank you, Just Me Crystal. Stick around and we will come back and dig in, because this next bit looks pretty intense. So yeah, I'll be right back. Hello, friends. Thank you for bearing with me. I forgot to eat before stream. My blood sugar was crashing, and so I had to shove some carbohydrates and sugar and stuff into my system real quick. So, a few bites of this and that, and I should be good to go for a few pages. Thank you all for bearing with me. I apologize for that again. And I didn't, I know sometimes we do the whole, food-based programming, but this was slightly different. This was me, shoving food into my mouth hole for the pure sake of sustenance. And I don't want to subject any of you to that. It is its own sort of body horror programming, like body horror content. It is you've seen me unhinge my jaw and devour things whole before, Brock. Yeah, you're fine. You didn't miss the show. So yeah, I should be good to go for a few more pages now. Small handful of meat sticks, a donut, and a few Reese's Pieces. Breakfast of champions. Don't worry, I plan to eat something healthy-ish. Lunch of champions. It would be lunch, except for that's the first thing I ate today. So, like, it's breakfast now. I do plan on eating something healthy-ish later on. I have things in mind. I mean, mostly, meat with some meat on the side. I think it's going to be cow and pig. But, yeah. So back to this. Like I had said, this paragraph really, I feel, ties into our greater message about the gender separations as well. So Buffon appeared to find inspiration from a generation of race theorists. He slid seamlessly from the assertion that blacks were robust and well made into a several-page dissertation on the beauty of shapely black women of select nations. In describing the women of Senegal, for example, whom he believed to be the most attractive of all black women, he stated, "They are tall, very black, well-proportioned, and their features far less harsh than those of other Negroes. The Senegalese have the same ideas of beauty as the Europeans, considering fine eyes, a well-formed nose, small mouth, and thin lips as essential ingredients. Their skin is soft and delicate, their color alone excepted. We find among them women as handsome as any in any other country in the world." In terms that echo the ideals of the High Renaissance, Buffon lauds the fine, well-proportioned figures of an entire nation of black women. I do think it's interesting to note this. In the midst of the Enlightenment's dismissal of corpulence as a sign of indolence and ignorance, particularly among men, he nevertheless continued to praise plumpness as an element of beauty in women. That also should be noted. As with Beignet, it is significant that the presumed beauty of black African women is found not in their departure from European standards of face and physique, but in their adherence to those standards. Again, proximity to whiteness being effectively proximity to health and beauty. The closer you are to the European beauty standard, the closer you are to healthy. And well, that's where this is leading. But right now, it's the closer you are to white, the closer you are to beautiful. Is the point that they're getting to, or that the idea that is being propagated by these people. This may seem peculiar given the racial project was one of demarcation, of making and refining distinction based on physical appearance. Instead, it reveals that the goal for many early theorists was to comprehend and make sense of the world's diversity. According to these theorists, women of the world over may in some critical respects have been racially distinct, but this did not place all of them beyond the pale of sexual desirability. Evidently, some non-European women were measuring up quite literally. In this way, early classification schemas may have been hierarchical, as we see with Benier's first race theory and Buffon's estimation of the beauty of black women, color alone accepted. But the overreaching project of the time was not necessarily to condemn black people to inferiority in every category. This wasn't may not have been the idea, but it was providing the framework in which the idea would be built. Still, while such condemnation was not the original intent, the project of race-making evolved. In the context of mushrooming French and British slave trade enterprises, presumed innate racial differences in mental capacity, industry, and sensual appetite came to be used as sound evidence of inherent inferiority. The body, too, became legible through racial discourse, as body size was increasingly linked to racial category. This transformation built on the work of Buffon. Discussions of race in natural history represented little more than a review of existing literature on the subject, yet the work's influence was undeniable. Natural history was widely disseminated and often quoted among French intellectuals during the Enlightenment. It found particular favor among radical rationalists such as Denis Diderot, whose own philosophical treatise on the use of reason and not religion for the attainment of moral excellence were winning him praise from the cognoscente and heat from the Catholic clergy. In 1749, as natural history was being published, so was Diderot's Letters on the Blind, the most recent of his dissident discourses on Christianity. This work earned him a short stint in prison. When he was released, he lowered the volume of his aesthetic rhetoric. He turned his attention instead to the development of a compendium that would rock the authority of the Church in a more covert fashion, revealing the vast universe of knowledge being generated by rational scientific inquiry. Diderot set to work on what would be his most celebrated and influential publication, Encyclopédie ou Dictionnaire raisonné des sciences, des arts et des métiers. Encyclopedia, or a systematic dictionary of the sciences, arts, and crafts. In the first draft, he set himself the painstaking task of merging the most significant scientific and philosophical interventions of the time, which included skimpy characterizations of Africa, Africans, and race. Exploring of the latter term were handpicked from his close friend Buffon's natural history, from which he reportedly reproduced ideas as he saw fit. The first iteration of the encyclopedia offered only a terse summation of Africa suitable for use by those invested in commercial trade. But French investment in the slave trade was burgeoning, as was the number of black Africans making their way back to the French metropolis. The growing presence of blacks in the territories, along with political dialogue swirling around them, may have encouraged Diderot to expand on the topic of blacks in subsequent editions of the encyclopedia. To do this, he tapped his friend and fellow philosopher Jean-Baptiste Pierre Le Romain, who had lived in the Caribbean, was a self-styled expert on the colonies and sugar plantations. He included in the encyclopedia the following description of that word, in the colonies. The slaves of Cape Verde or Senegalese are regarded as the most attractive in all of Africa. The coast of Angola, the kingdom of Longo, and the Congo produce an abundance of attractive, that word. Their penchant for pleasure makes them fairly unfit for hard labor, since they are generally lazy, cowardly, and very fond of gluttony. The least esteemed of all of that word are the Bambaras. Their uncleanliness, as well as their large scars that they give themselves across their cheeks from the nose to the ears, make them hideous. They are lazy, drunken, gluttonous, and apt to steal. Le Romain's judgment of the Senegalese as the most attractive of the black Africans seemed to have been lifted directly from Buffon's text. Given not only the eminence of natural history, but also Diderot's personal ties to Buffon, this was probably no coincidence. But Le Romain dramatically shifted the tenor of his assessment from that of Buffon. In a neat few paragraphs, he pulled together several defamatory generalizations about the blacks of Africa. They were lazy and thieving, with a penchant for pleasure and a fondness for gluttony. Le Romain's use of the word gluttony had not been lifted from Buffon. In Buffon's opinion, the bulky frames of blacks were due to the ready availability of food, combined with their lack of mental capacity needed to devote themselves to activities other than eating. Le Romain's use of the term gluttony implied something else, a willful greediness that, ironically, given Diderot's atheism, evoked the 7 deadly sins. Diderot. He sounds like he's describing the French. Yeah. Diderot, like the husky race. How you doing, Maddie? Good to see you. Thank you for being here. Pardon me. It does. And funny thing is, I feel like these are some French. I know they're French people. It feels like that thing where projection, projection, where somebody projects their own insecurities on other people. This sounds like a lot of projection to me. Last time I saw a projection like that, it was in CinemaScope. Hey yo! The encyclopedia seems to have been one of the earliest prominent publications to make the claim that blacks were fond of gluttony. But it was not the first ever to do so, nor would it be the last. Reports had been making their way to Europe from the colonies describing the ritual practice of overfeeding in Africa for over a century. In the 1580s, for instance, the Italian botanist Prospero Alpini that's a heck of a name, pronounced himself awestruck by what he called the art of fattening in Egypt. The women there, he claimed, ingested drugs and a cornucopia of food laden with animal fat in order to make themselves as rotund as possible. Alpini found the gluttonous indulgence deeply disturbing. Vice of the flesh, a sterling example of the immorality of Egyptians. Can one desire anything more shameful than an obesity acquired through the infamous vice of the flesh of unchecked sensuality? This vice is so widespread down there that one sees most women flop down on the ground like fat sows. Alpini was not alone in this assessment. In 1625, the Englishman Samuel Purchas published a 4-volume set of stories pertaining to the inhabitants of distant lands, based particularly on travel narratives left behind by his late countryman, Richard Hakluyt. In Purchas's Hakluytus Posthumus, or Purchas his Pilgrims, he too expressed his disdain for the unbridled sensuality of blacks in Guinea, denouncing them as orally and sexually insatiable heathens. They have no knowledge of God. They are greedy eaters, no less drinkers, very lecherous and thievish, and much addicted to uncleanness. One man hath as many wives as he is able to keep and maintain. Accounts of black Africans eating to excess were clearly not unknown before the 18th century. But whereas earlier accounts fell into the category of outlandish tales of sensational cultural practices, by mid-century such narratives were becoming a type of gospel. Diderot's encyclopedia played no small part in this shift. Now I see why I underlined all of that. The text was widely read and disseminated among intellectuals whose commercial ties in Africa right up until The text was widely read and disseminated among intellectuals and those with commercial ties in Africa right up until the French Revolution. The encyclopedia served as an important text in the new science of race. It lent credibility to the idea that it was not idle eating as per Buffon, but the vice of gluttony that was inherent to black Africans' sumptuous way of life. Given that such indulgence was intrinsic to the black way, it was not discouraged among the dark-skinned people, but according to scientists and philosophers in the new field of race science, positively encouraged. And again, we see we're seeing this trend away from, I guess it's not and again, but we are here seeing this trend away from environmental, the idea that it was environmental to a more essentialism based idea. That it is inherent in the people that they are this way. If French intellectuals such as Buffon and Diderot detailed in their massive and influential oeuvres the so-called nature of the races, and within this black African proclivity for overfeeding and fleshiness, British writers too were growing ever more scornful of the purported African gourmand. The agreement among French and British authors on the question of excessive appetites among blacks is evident in the writings of the colonial transplant Edward Long. In 1774, Long wrote the influential History of Jamaica, in which he cast a wide net around the Negro race, suggesting that blacks in the Americas were no different from their brethren in Africa. Again, leaning towards essentialism. In a text rife with contradictions, Long suggested that those persons from Negro land in general have no moral sensations, no taste but for women, gourmandizing and drinking to excess, but wish to be idle. If the statements labeling blacks as idle gourmands appear Buffonian, this is not a coincidence. Edward Long idolized Buffon, peppering his book with citations from the French thinker. It is not surprising, therefore, that Long, like Buffon, claims that many blacks were large, fat, well-proportioned, and not a few of the women were particularly well-shaped, worthy of praise. This was owing not just to the gourmandizing predilection of blacks, but also to the hot climates that contributed to their corpulent muscular bodies. The major difference between Long and Buffon was that Long was a polygenist. He was convinced that the idle avarice of blacks, as well as their size and stature, proved that they were of a wholly different origin. That is important right there. That's one of the really important ones. It's that othering. It's that extreme othering. In a miasma of evidence used to reveal the absurdity of claims of human unity, Long cites not only Buffon, but also a Shakespearean sonnet. In the catalogue they go for men, as hounds, as greyhounds, mongrels, spaniels, all by the name of dogs, that written them all alike, and so of men. Says that faithful observer of nature, our immortal Shakespeare, and with him so far agrees truly learned and sagacious naturalist Mons Buffon, who investigates the marks of variation among mankind in the following manner. Men differ from white to black, from compound to simple, by the height of stature, size, and other bodily characteristics, and from genius to the dolt. I do not like being called adult. Buffon and Shakespeare may seem like strange bedfellows, but Long's text shows how French and British literati could be randomly cited in service of claims about fundamental black-white distinctions. That, I believe, is important as well. It is not surprising that French and British were at the helm of the 18th century racial scientific discourse, marking black people as gluttonous. Oops. The growing commodification of black people as greedy eaters developed against the backdrop of the accelerating slave trade among these two colonial powers of the 18th century. This, together with the exigencies of reasoned self-management in the context of high enlightenment, transformed the act of eating from personal to political. Gonna do this. Indulging in food, once deemed by philosophers to be a low-brow predilection of slow-witted persons, became evidence of actual low breeding. It bespoke an inborn race-specific propensity for laziness and ease, an unbridled desire to meet the demands of the flesh at the expense of cultivating higher pursuits. Such behavior was deemed wholly uncharacteristic of the rational thinkers sitting atop the new racial hierarchy. And yet, up to this point, the large and robust feminine forms that such eating presumably engendered were still prized. The tail end of the 18th century would mark the dawn of a new era. In an attempt to rationalize even aesthetic values, the beauty of the plump feminine form was reconsidered. And here is where I think we are going to stop for the day. Although I do want to say, I do want to quickly talk about. Uh, I, I don't know if. I don't remember if later in the book they get to talking about uh, how synonymous the black female form is with being fat. And it's not a truth. It's just something that people have basically made up. I don't know. I don't know. But it is, I feel like, there's just, not the presumption that black women, people haven't made up, the link is made up, not the thought that people have made this link up. There is, I don't think any more of a link between being a black woman and being fat than there is being a white woman or being a white man and being fat. I think other than cultural the cultural links, other than the stuff that we're sort of forced into by circumstance of where we are. And I feel like, there was gonna be whatever went on, whatever they decided were the traits of black people, they were gonna decide that it was evidence of inferiority. So yeah, that's, again, I'm just an idiot. I'm sure you're watching me try to rub two thoughts together to start a fire, and I ain't the brightest spark in the tinder box, as it were. So, well, yeah. Thank you everyone for being here. Hopefully we will be back next week. There's no reason we shouldn't, and we will read more from this. Thank you, Maddie Holmes. Thank you, Just Me Crystal. Thank you, Darth Dragonis. Thank you, all you lurkers. Much love. Stick around for the raid. And now is the time on the show when I say, as they say around here, 2 up, 2 down, VA, double deuces. I'm out, y'all.
Let me entertain you. 1,000